Thank you to Uma for the sport, and lots of people getting in touch about all sorts of different issues. The Palestinian statehood is what Luke wants to talk about. He's given us a ring on 0344 499 1000. Luke, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good afternoon, Peter. Nice to speak with you again. Yeah, I wanted to come on really and just sort of express the view that I think the Netanyahu government is responsible in Gaza for some of the most sort of unconscionable acts against humanity that I've seen in my lifetime. And I should say at the outset that some may be surprised that I'm expressing that view. I mean, my support for Israel and my left-wing Zionism has long been an integral part of my political identity. I think, we saw during the Corbyn years of the Labour Party, anti-Zionism manifested itself in a way that was often pernicious and hostile to Jewish identity and Jewish culture. So I remain, a supporter of Israel.
Well, you're illustrating a really good point, Luke, in that you can be pro-Israel without being pro the Israeli government.
No, absolutely, Peter. And I think, in many ways, Israel is a beacon of progressivism and, kind of liberalism in an otherwise very backward regressive region in terms of gay rights, women's rights. And I also think that, I obviously completely respect and accept the conflict's nuances, its very complex nature. The fact that, throughout much of my lifetime, it's been the Palestinian side, the side that have been the greatest impasse to, the greatest barrier to the advancement of peace in terms of the failures of Oslo or obviously Camp David Accords, or obviously, Mahmoud Abbas refusing Ehud Olmert's offer of 98% of the West Bank and Gaza when it was proposed in 2005. But I think, we turn to what's happened in the last couple of years. I mean, obviously I should say that nothing should ever trivialise or diminish the moral depravity, the evils of what we saw in October the 7th, the largest Jewish massacre since the Second World War. And obviously, any civilised democratic nation, which, I think Israel still is to some extent, despite the Netanyahu's government's determination to erode what's left of that status, is entitled to defend itself, and clearly, obviously, it was entitled to, to defend itself.
Do you think the Israeli government is actually its own worst enemy in some respect? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think a lot of people, I perhaps don't put myself in this category, actually. I don't think I'm as far down the road as you, Luke. But certainly there are a number of people who I really want to support Israel. I really want it to be a free, fair society. I'm definitely a Zionist, there's no doubt about that. What I'm really worried about is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza for lots and lots of reasons. First and foremost, the humanitarian crisis.
The Netanyahu government, I think its military strategy, one, is rooted in cognitive dissonance. I think, secondly, it's guilty of large-scale war crimes now in Gaza. I mean, I say that because one cannot admit the fact that it was a Netanyahu government that has had as its raison d'etre, the opposition to any form of Palestinian state. Has, for many, many years, been pushing the Palestinians to ever greater levels of destitution and hopelessness. And, obviously, in doing so, it permitted the funneling of billions of pounds of funds to Hamas via Qatar and Egypt as part of the divide and rule game it sought to play against, the PA and Hamas in order to prevent the advancement of any kind of Palestinian statehood. I mean, Netanyahu said as much in early 2019 at a Likud faction meeting. I think if you look at Matthew Saeed, the journalist that I'm incredibly fond of,
Sunday Times columnist, he's a very thoughtful man. Yeah, I read his column every week.
Yeah. He talked, you cannot bomb a nation into rubble, reduce 92% of its residential buildings.
So how do we get out of this? How do we get peace in the Middle East? What is the solution here? Does Netanyahu have to go? Does there have to be, there's a lot of pressure from the UK government for a ceasefire. They want to recognise a Palestinian state. Is that the way you would go?
Well, I think it's necessitated now, Palestinian state recognition. I've always accepted the argument that, it shouldn't be done as part of a morally virtuous act to make a Western government, feel good about itself, obviously given the, the lives we enjoy.
But many people feel it is just virtue signalling and actually it won't change anything. And in some ways it's actually appeasing Hamas. But hold on, Luke. I just want to very briefly make the point, Luke, that actually there's no condition on Hamas releasing the hostages, for example, which you've talked about. Of course, there's no condition that Palestinian statehood would be given by Keir Starmer, for example.
Well, of course, the hostages need to be unconditionally released. I mean, obviously, in Hamas and those responsible for its atrocities must account, for its war crimes in the Hague. Likewise, I'm afraid to say, I think, Ben Gvir, Smotrich, the defence minister, Netanyahu, and other government ministers in the present Israeli government need to also account for their acts against humanity.
Well, there's some nasty people there. There's no doubt about that.
But you know, in terms of why I think that the Palestinian statehood is now a necessity, is because if you look at the present Israeli government, you have Netanyahu, a man who has no interest in concluding this war because there's prolongation.
I mean, he would say that's not the case, and all he's trying to do is get the hostages back.
But he awaits a corruption trial. You know, he awaits, and he is in hook to two of the most depraved, perverse, fascist ministers in Israeli politics we've ever seen, in the form of Ben Gvir and Smodovich.
I think look, we've got to leave it there. I'm not cutting you off. You've said some really interesting and intelligent things, but we've just got to crash the news, and we don't want to do that. But look, I would highly recommend you read Yotam Confino's book on the cabinet. Yotam Confino, of course, is a contributor to this programme, and